Hello and welcome back to the Football Heritage podcast. I'm your host Rory Bryce, and today I am joined all the way from South Africa by Nimalan, who is going to tell us a little bit about the Mpumalanga Black Aces. Nimalan, how are you? Thanks very much for coming on.
Yeah, all good. Like I said, I think you starting off with Black Aces, and if you go back into the history books, unfortunately as well, the history books are not very recorded very well here in this country. But it takes you back to workers who worked on the dairy. In about 1937, they formed their club. At that time, there was no Kaiser Chiefs. The main clubs were probably Orlando Pirates, because probably the oldest club in Soweto, along with Morocco Swallows. And then, they tended to be a club with sort of, I'll call it yo-yoed between the Premier League, which was formed in 97, and then the first division. And what happened was I think somebody did buy them, moved them. I think that's when they became called Mpumalanga Black Aces, bought the franchise off. They also went through another sort of rebranding. I think before that, they were actually known as Dangerous Darkies. Um,
Mhm.
and then the most recent, I could say, unfortunately, was that, Cape Town City then saw an opportunity to buy their franchise. Tough one, because, you when you're buying a franchise, the other thing is you got to think of is, what about the players? So, I mean, if I was playing for Mpumalanga Black Aces, there's no guarantee that if so whoever takes us over, they're gonna continue with those contracts. So
Mm.
a lot of players would have found themselves, without contracts. I think though Cape Town City seem to have a more measured approach, because they're not in the business of hiring and firing coaches at random or at will.
Mm.
So in terms of that, they run quite well. I mean, like I said, 2016 bought over by John Comitas. Eric Tinkler, the former Bafana player, has been there for a while.
Mm.
Even Benny McCarthy, the former Bafana striker,
Oh,
he coached there for a while. Yeah, one of his first gigs, in fact, and he did quite well. So they've won a few cup competitions as well. And obviously in South Africa, we have what's called a top eight sort of incentive. So the teams that finish in the top eight at the beginning of every season, they play in a top eight cup. So first
oh.
would play eight, second would play seventh. So it's just a sort of an incentive for clubs to sort of um, do well there. But yeah, I mean, following on from that, if I was Black Aces from Limpopo, and then in Mpumalanga, which is more in the northern regions of South Africa. Now, if you think about it, I think you're going to struggle to find any Black Aces supporters, because
Yeah,
the club is disbanded.
yeah. I mean,
You
that's
know,
one of the things that I was going to ask is that obviously, that's a really fantastic summary of the Black Aces and a kind of good snapshot into their history overall. But being founded in 1937, they're obviously a very old club and a very historic club, and they've been around
yes,
in different iterations for quite some time. But I would say that the amount of times that they've folded and come back and then been bought over,
yes,
and maybe just some of the confusion around who actually owns the club, probably led a lot of supporters to be put off. And I'd imagine that we're probably coming into a period of time where there won't be any Black Aces supporters left in living history before long. I mean, that's my take on it anyway. I mean, have you ever met any Black Aces supporters or former supporters of the club?
not really. In fact, I mean, and this is the problem, because I mean, I think I worked with a guy who was from Limpopo, and he was a Black Aces fan, Mpumalanga actually, and I mean, he was happy, but then, like I said, your team's now been bought by someone who relocates the team to Cape Town, so changes the name, so that history is just wiped out like that. Um, and that's the frustrating thing, because I mean, can you imagine if for example, I don't know, let's say somebody decided to buy Man United tomorrow and said, okay, you know what, we're going to change the name as well. Well, what do you think will happen?
People would kick off.
Unfortunately, it's the overriding factor is money. Look, I mean, I can see Cometa. He's trying to develop football in Cape Town. So I can't really hold it against him because they've got good youth structures, and South Africa needs that. We
Yeah.
need good youth structures. So I can't really begrudge him because at the end of the day, I guess he's a businessman. But I mean, like I said, having supported a club that eventually folded myself,
Mm.
it can be quite heartbreaking. Again, I mean, just to quickly interject there, I mean, Manning Rangers first. So if you thought Leicester was a fairy tale story, I
Mm.
mean, this was unbelievable because I mean the previous seasons we just wanted them to survive relegation, and they actually played in a friendly tournament against Kaiser Chiefs before the start of the season, and Chiefs beat them 9-0. Um,
Wow.
uh, yeah, and I mean, you really see this, but everybody lost hope. But I think what helped them was they had a very tight knit group of players, and amazingly, their away form. I think they only lost one game away from home the whole season. So,
That's
and
that's
again, what happened?
yeah.
What happened? It's a sad case because you win the league. They even played at African Champions League. Nothing built on that. The club folded. They were taken over by an insurance or financial services company called Fidentia, and Fidentia folded. So the club had to fold as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean we've talked about it numerous times on the podcast where something like that happens where either a club is founded by a company and they have this seemingly unlimited pot of cash, or they're bought over by a big company and they have all this money pumped into them. But the second that company decides to pull out because they're not seeing any returns, then you might as well kiss goodbye to your football club because they're not going to keep, it's not going to hang around for long.
Yeah, look, the other thing is, if you look at any league in the world,
Mhm.
every team can't win the league. There's probably, maybe if you look at the English league, there's probably only about 6 or 7 that can probably win the league. I mean, and this is the thing with South African football. I mean, there's another club called Chippa United. And I mean, I'm not surprised. These guys should be in the Guinness Book of Records for the most coaches within, let's say, 2 years. I kid you not, they've gone through at least 14 coaches in the PSL era.
Wow.
So,
That's a
and this is, I mean, we'll talk about it a little bit, but this is also the problem with South African football. In terms of they want quick wins,
sure.
but do you want quick wins? Because, everybody can't win the title, but what about developing players and good players that you can sell on to other clubs or have a really good youth policy? Unfortunately, not too many clubs tend to follow that principle.
Mm.
To be fair to Cape Town City, though, they've given a lot of youngsters a chance.
Okay.
And I think that's also down to maybe the vision of Comitis and the coach, because they know they can't. For example, if they need to buy a player, if they put in a bid and Sundowns put in a bid, the player's going to go to Sundowns because of the money aspect, and
Absolutely. Yeah,
so
the
they they
biggest
have
club.
to be very strategic about that. But yeah, I mean, we coming back to Black Aces, and then that region, the Limpopo region. Um, a lot of clubs have in I'd say in the last 3 seasons, there's probably about 6 clubs that have changed ownership. You probably see there's a club called TS Galaxy.
Yes.
They owned by a football agent, bought off someone. Sekekune United, owned by someone, bought off someone.
Hmm.
Um, so it's also difficult for a coach because if you've been coaching aces and now, sure, um, Cape Town City comes through and says, "Hey, we're taking you over." You don't know whether you're going to have a job. So that unfortunately is the chaotic essence of club management here, or should I say, club ownership.
Yeah, it's a
Um,
it's a really interesting insight into the nature of it all, and I didn't actually realize that how common this was within football in South
yeah,
Africa once I've done a little more digging. That it seems that it's almost kind of went the way of the A League after the NSL and
Okay.
MLS after the collapse of the NASL. Would that be right? We're going off on a little bit of a tangent, so we'll bring it back to Black Aces shortly. But would it be right in
Sure.
saying that?
Yeah, I think so because, like I said, I mean, besides maybe, well, no one can really afford to buy off Chiefs, Pirates, Sundowns,
Mm,
but every
yeah,
other club is probably is cannon fodder for someone to buy them over.
same.
Yeah, and the issue is, like I said, the short sightedness of club owners. I mean, like taking Kaiser Chiefs for example, great club founded by Kaiser Motong, who played in the US. He played with Pele.
Yeah,
When he came back and he said, "Look, let me form my own club." It was actually he used to play for Pirates, but he formed his rebel club. So that's how they got formed.
nice. I like it.
But they've actually fallen behind in the last few years because as a when you and I'm sure you being a football fan, the emphasis on a director of football, technical director, is more prevalent and vital now than more than ever.
It is.
You look at Aston Villa, for example. I mean, Emery got there, and the next minute I see Monchi is there as well. And and I mean that guy is, as we all know, his football contacts span the world literally.
Yeah.
So, but we don't get this here. I mean, if I look at Chiefs, they've employed Kaiser's employed some of his kids within the structure, but that means his son is buying the players. But what knowledge does his son have? What's the strategy? If I'm a coach, do you want me to play tiki taka? Do you want me to play long ball?
Yeah, it's
And it
interesting.
just all
That's actually what's happened at Celtic right now as well. I'm a Celtic fan myself, as our
okay.
listeners know. But Peter Lawwell, who was the long-standing CEO at Celtic,
Yeah.
he retired a couple of years ago, and now he's back on the board in a non-executive position. But his son, who
Okay.
worked with the City Football Group, is actually our director of football slash head of scouting, head of recruitment. So you think to yourself, wow, City Football Group, fantastic. Not been the case. I know that Celtic are trying to go for this model of buy players, sell them for a profit, but
Yeah.
Scottish football's in the position Celtic are in terms of a European standpoint is quite different and quite challenging because if these players don't hit the ground running almost immediately, then you're almost never going to be able to sell them for a profit.
Well, that's it. And I mean, you look at about 4 or 5 years ago, Celtic had guys like Victor Wanyama, Virgil van Dijk,
Yeah,
even probably Hendrik Larsson, good players who could perform in other leagues as well. I mean, and I thought, sure, it looks like Celtic is the team to watch here because they keep finding these gems. But yeah, I mean, and I think what's also changed in the past where you looked at like coming back to Black Aces, it was a very community driven thing. You know,
yes,
you it's a what everybody is then going now. That time there was no TV in terms of watching the games. I mean, I'm talking pre 75 and stuff like that. So
mm,
you'd have to go to the grounds and you'd experience the full atmosphere there. And I think also, guys really played for the crowd. So, which is kind of a little bit of a bad habit because I think you know where I'm going with this. I mean, it's great if you can, if you look at a guy like Ronaldinho, who could probably have taken on the whole field, but he never did that. You
no,
know,
no,
he knew when to rein it in. But that's one of the things where I think also a little bit of a downfall of South African football. If we go to the ground and you saying, oh, this team is 3-0 down, but the guy does a trick or puts it through the guy's legs and the whole crowd is ululating and getting excited. But you're thinking, hold on, these guys are 3-0 down, the crowd is still cheering, you know?
yeah, exactly.
So, that's I think, it gives you a little bit of the background. And even if you're going back to those times, if you think about, I mean, when Aces were formed, and my late granddad, he played football for a long time. But remember, because there was an Indian league, colored league, he didn't really get the exposure. And eventually, when he was selected to play for a provincial side, he needed I think he needed money to go on it.
Mm.
So he thought to himself, do I basically spend money to go and make this? I don't even know whether it's going to be a career, or do I use the money to take care of my family?
Yeah.
So a lot of footballers back in the day face those kinds of dilemmas. Also because, I mean, at that time there was no real, well, what could you say? Like big contracts, things like that. You still had guys changing in the cars, using
Yeah.
transport, things like that. But but
Exactly.
but on the yeah, but the PSL is very quickly, when they started, they did a lot of good things where they gave clubs a monthly grant to sustain themselves. You know, um, Also things like, there is things in place where you've got to basically pay a player a certain wage. We've had a lot of disputes about that, unfortunately,
Mm.
in the news. But a lot of these go to arbitration, and the legal standpoint works. So yeah, they've come a long way. And I think what was the golden goose was that prior to, let's say, pay television, and you probably know Sky and things like that. And
Satanta was what
our
I grew up with.
our equivalent was multi-choice or Mnet. But what happened was you still get the games on the free to air. So all the local games were still on. I could still watch it for free.
Mm.
So then the PSL said, look, we're actually sitting on a golden goose here.
Yeah.
And enter multi-choice or Mnet, who then bought the rights. But obviously, from a political standpoint, maybe 10% of the population can afford pay TV. So there
Exactly.
was an uproar. But what you see now is that, so MultiChoice still has the rights, or the golden goose, and they sort of sublet it to our national broadcaster, which is SABC. So,
Oh,
but I mean, if you want to watch every game, let's say that Cape Town City play, the likelihood is you won't find every game on the national broadcaster.
yeah, of
But
course.
if you go onto MultiChoice, you may well find they're showing most of the game. So, that's a little bit about the eco, in terms of the environment and economic. So, yeah, in terms of the PSL,
Mm. It's very, very interesting, and I think a couple of things that you mentioned there, I just wanted to go and go back and touch on, just in regards to the Black Aces. Of course, being founded in 1937 and then existing, well, the first time they folded was in 2002, after they
yes,
finished 14th in the National First Division. The club has existed entirely through the apartheid era, and then the lifting of apartheid as well. And you touched on it there when you mentioned that there was different leagues for people of different races and people of
yes,
different colours. And when you said that football is a community thing, I can imagine, and obviously from Phil doing his research and reading the book, the Black Aces were a team that was majority made up of African people, or people of color, or
correct.
people from
Yeah,
South Africa and the other local areas outside. So you can imagine that people going along to see them play, there was probably another dynamic of community there as well, and that these people were representing,
yes.
other
So
people of the same race. And I think this is quite important when we talk about the history of football in South Africa, is that you always have to have this backdrop of race, politics, and apartheid behind it.
100%. The thing was, I mean, if you ask South Africans who the greatest footballer was, and it's very a touchy point, because a guy like Kaiser Motaung never played in Champions League, but a Benny McCarthy has won a Champions League. But I mean, a lot of guys will tell you, or the old timers, as we like to call them, will tell you that Jomo Sono was the best. I
Yeah.
mean, another guy who eventually during the apartheid days headed off to the US, in the time of Pele, played for the New York Cosmos,
Mm.
came back and formed Jomo Cosmos. Also, a guy who was big on youth development.
Yeah.
But like you're saying, initially, remember, we were all playing in different leagues. So I was playing in the Indian League, and I got no idea who you are. You playing in another league.
Yeah.
And then what happened was that towards the 70s and the 80s, the boundaries started becoming a little bit blurred.
Okay.
So what happened was that with the NFG, you were now finding that they were, I'll call it white teams, like Highlands Park, Wits,
Mm.
playing against the likes of the Pirates and the Chiefs. And again, remember, you've got to think about it now. I mean, if I'm going and I'm going to watch Highlands Park play Pirates, all
Mm.
I want to see as a black person, I just want to see Jomo Sona slaughter these guys on the field. You know,
Yeah, of
because
course.
because there was so much of oppression, but
Yep,
that was the one place where you could say, hey, hold on, we can show these guys what we can do.
exactly, exactly.
You
And
know,
obviously, as a white person, I'll never know what oppression feels like. But of course, when you're watching that in the football field and you're seeing players that are representing you absolutely slaughter these guys in the field, it must have felt great for the 90 minutes that you were watching it.
yeah, 100%. I mean, this is the thing, and I mean, if I think about it, I take back to the Manning Rangers days and going and watching them. So obviously, South Africa's got sort of during the apartheid days, they put a lot of the people of color in townships.
Yes.
So in Durban, Chatsworth was an Indian township, and that's where I grew up. So when you see sort of and I still remember Man City came and played a friendly in Chatsworth Stadium
Yeah.
uh, with a very old. Look, I'm an Everton fan, but it was a sentimental thing because Peter Reid was at the end of his career with Man City.
Sure.
But that's it. It used to sort of create a bit of a hostile atmosphere.
Mm.
However, once integration started, then you notice the crowds weren't that partisan. Um, we used to moan because we said, look, Rangers is playing Chiefs, but there's more Chiefs supporters in the ground. So it's
Yeah.
like a home game for them. And that used to really piss us off. Whereas maybe 10 years earlier, there would be more Rangers guys in the ground. But it's also, a case of, economically as well, it's been a poor township. So,
Sure.
if you're going to a game, well, actually, it wasn't that bad that time because you're looking at, I mean, I'm talking 96, 97. You pay 25 Rand, which is, I think, probably a pound
Oh,
uh,
okay.
for a match.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean, there are no box seats and prawn
Sure.
sandwiches and stuff like that. You're sitting on concrete slabs and, a stand there the way the seats are a little bit broken and I think that's the experience. You mentioned 2010, but unfortunately, it wasn't the shot in the arm that we thought it would be.
Course.
You
Yeah,
know,
yeah, and that's something that we're going to talk about a little bit towards the end of the episode is the World Cup and how things haven't quite went the way that we think maybe the authorities in South African football had maybe hoped it would, because it's been a little bit of a been a little well maybe damp squibs a little bit harsh. Obviously, football is always important to the people within the country that's watching it, but in terms of the kind of boost that it wanted to give South African football, especially to the rest of the world, it didn't quite go as smoothly as that, did it?
unfortunately, not. I mean, the FIFA pledged a lot of money into football development, but we only qualified because we hosted the World Cup.
Yeah,
As 2010, and we were the first nation, unfortunately, not even to make the last 16. You know,
yeah,
um, so and you ask yourself, where is the development? Because if you go back to the French team of '98, which won the World Cup, when they didn't qualify for World Cup, I think it was they didn't qualify for the '90 World Cup
yeah. I think
and
that's right.
'94. They very quickly, instituted Clairefontaine youth structures, the best, and they reap the benefits. So again, it seems as if there was no single plan, or someone could say, "Hey, look, you know what? Let's bring in a guy like Arsene Wenger to
Mm,
come and guide us on how do we set up our youth structures, things like that.
yeah,
How do we select players? Unfortunately, one of the things that still haunts, and I mean, I coached at junior level for a good few years,
mm.
is overage cheating. So, I mean, we
Ah, of
played guys.
course. Yeah,
We played a team that was under 12, and I tell you what, the guy looked like he was 17, but but his documentation is there. but you're skeptical. But it's still a problem because when that guy goes to actually play with the under-17s, he's found out. You know,
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
so there's never been, there didn't seem to be a coherent plan. We had a good, I mean, if I think back to the glory days of '96 and the AFCON, we had a good squad. We had Clive Barker, like a man motivator type of manager,
Yeah,
but the team was really tight knit. And once those guys got contracts after AFCON, then they obviously started playing overseas. But it paved the way for the likes of a Quinton Fortune, Benny McCarthy,
mm,
even a Sean Bartlett,
yeah,
But the problem is, if you have to ask me now, who's the best South African guys who are playing in Europe, I can't tell you. I could say Lyle Foster, but
mm, yeah,
he's, he's he's also taken a bit of a break due to mental issues. So I can't really tell you. Look, hey, we've got a lot of guys coming through. So it's also due to a number of factors where if I'm playing for, let's say I'm playing for a Cape Town City, and
yeah,
Chiefs come in with an offer for me. So Chiefs come in with an offer for me, they double my salary. When I reach Chiefs, I think I've made it. So what happens is that there's a culture of guys partying, coming to training drunk. I mean, recently Chiefs' goalkeeper, Itumeleng Nkune, which is about 33 or 34, he's had to be suspended because he's been pitching up to training sessions drunk.
yeah. Right.
So, some of it is self-inflicted as well because, if you go and I take you to, let's say, okay, let's go and watch a junior game, and you'll say, sure, the talent is really good here,
Mm,
you know, but then somewhere along the line between that junior setup and then maybe between PSL as well, there's something that's missing there.
sure.
I think part of, let's say that there's always been a misalignment between the PSL, which is obviously the Premier League, and SAFA, which is responsible for Bafana Bafana or
Yeah,
South African football.
yeah,
So there's often a case of, clubs don't want to release players for camps, especially if it's not a FIFA date,
sure.
that type of thing. And then you also see clubs buying maybe 15 players. They've already got a squad of about 40. And then remember, hold on, but Liam was a promising player at Cape Town City. Now he's just sitting on the bench for Sundowns. His career is basically, he's taken a back step because he's just sitting on the bench. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
instead of to say, look, maybe we can loan this guy out to a few other clubs,
Mm.
or another club and get him playing. So yeah, I think that's I mean the lack of a solid focus on youth development is a huge stumbling block.
Well, it's quite interesting when you mentioned their players just sitting on the bench. Or maybe I'll try and do you one better. Does the name Afalele Teto mean anything to you?
Afaleli
Afalele Teto.
sounds familiar. Did he
Yep.
play in
So,
Scotland?
Livingston in the Scottish Premiership signed him from TS Galaxy in
Yes.
summer this year, but he never got a work permit. His work
Okay.
permit to play over here was never approved. But Livingston signed him anyway, and they said, no, it's okay. We'll wait until January so we can appeal. And they're saying, well, it's unlikely this appeal is going to go ahead. So
Yes.
instead of he's not even sitting on the bench. He's not played a single bit of football. He's not even allowed in the country to be able to train with the team. And I don't
Wow.
know what Livingston were thinking doing that, because it just seems so unfair, because the guy's only 2021. He's very young, and by all accounts he was a promising young player.
Yeah.
And it must just be this thing where if you're isolated from the team, you're not really able to train. It just seems crazy to me, and his career will really, really take a hit for that.
That's it. I mean, is he not allowed to train even with the youth team, things like that?
I don't. If he's not got a work permit, then he won't be allowed to stay in Scotland for, I think, past 3 months, maybe a bit more.
So he was likely to have to come back to South Africa, but
Yeah, yeah,
and that's a tricky thing now because Livingston may well have paid a transfer fee for him. So what happens in that case?
Well, they went through with the signing, so the transfer fee's been paid. So they're the ones that confirmed it. You know, when they came back and said he's not eligible for a work permit, Livingston, instead of just cancelling the deal, they said, okay, we'll go through with it. So if there was any fee, compensation, transfer, then
Wow, and that's really sad. Like I said, I mean, we've got so few players playing, in Europe, and the guys who are playing in like Portugal, that type of thing, and they're not always regulars for their clubs.
yeah,
So it's just another blow to us in terms of development of our players.
absolutely, absolutely. And I think a lot of the issues that you've mentioned are a bit of, I think this is why I think the Black Aces were such an interesting team because they were kind of like an insight into all these things going on at once. Obviously you had apartheid and oppression, and you had segregation that they then had to deal with, and when the leagues, as you say, the lines sort of started becoming blurred, a lot of their better players got picked off and picked up by larger teams. And they were playing in different leagues and playing with people that they'd never played with before, etc., etc. But then the fact that they folded and the fact that they kind of came back and then they get bought over and then they get made into a youth team and then they get renamed to Amazayone, and then
Yeah,
obviously Cape Town City came in, and from what you've said it sounds like Komitas with Cape Town City, it sounds like he's got a really good vision for the club, and he's actually trying to do some good. But
he
when
does.
this was all going on with the Black Aces at the time, was it big news that they folded and were then being brought back as a youth team, or did it just kind of go under the radar at the time? Do you remember much of it happening?
You see, and I'll tell you a story as well in terms of the club I supported, Manning Rangers, and they actually as well bought off a status of a PSL club called Ratchanang,
Okay.
and they rebranded themselves as well Manning Rangers. Um,
The MK Dons of South Africa then.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But by the time we heard okay, Aces, and this is what's happening. It was, to be honest with you, it wasn't a surprise because
Mm,
the cynics will tell you, oh, this is par for the course in South African football.
sure.
Like I said, in the last 6 seasons, we've had probably four or five takeovers. I mean, the Wits one was a shocker because I mean they had over 100 years of history. As a university, one of the more prestigious ones, and they always had an excellent football structure in terms of setup. They believed mainly in promoting the youth. They also won the PSL under a very good coach called Gavin Hunt.
Okay.
But when they got taken over, again it was like, oh wow, Wits is getting bought off. So we've seen this movie before, you know. So I think what's the thing is that what controls are there? You know, can basically Elon Musk tomorrow just go and buy Man United and rename them? I don't think so. You know,
Yeah.
but here in South Africa, the buying of statuses happens all the time. So
Okay.
it wasn't really outrage. I think the guys would have felt outrage would have been the guys in Mpumalanga because
Sure.
at that point in time, there weren't a lot of clubs that represented that region. So I'm talking Mpumalanga, the northwest area of South Africa as well, a
Yeah.
much drier region. So they didn't have a lot of representation. So, they used to get good crowds. So I think those guys, their supporters would have felt it a bit more. And I mean now I'm supporting in Mpumalanga. I'm not going to drive to Cape Town to watch this team. Anyway, the identity is gone. That ace, that emblem on there is gone. Everything, the slogan, you know.
Yeah,
So it's
I'm
like
actually really, really glad that you mentioned the identity side of things because that's something that we talk about a lot in this podcast. Is that if you change a name or a badge or take something away from a club that people see as an identifying feature, then people will stop supporting because it's so important to them. It is their identity.
there we go. Yeah, I mean that's the thing. Now yes, Cape Town guys will rejoice because they've got another club to support. But what about the Mpumalanga guys?
Yeah,
They've got no one to support. They have to look for someone else. And with supporting a team, it's not just changing. at a whim.
Yeah.
It's that emotional attachment. So yeah, I think that's the it's like we know that the league just allows this to happen with little regard for identity and emotional attachment. So it didn't come as a big surprise to us.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's interesting to know just with everything that was going on. And I think that leads us quite nicely on to other clubs from South Africa that have went defunct and become lost, because it sounds like, as you've mentioned, there's a lot of buyouts, there's a lot of different things going on. And I think it brings a different dynamic to it when a club is bought out, because it's almost more tragic than if they just, kind of go defunct and slip out of history.
Yeah, I mean, you also got another club called Highlands Park, which was one of the foremost, let's call it, white clubs in the NSL.
Okay.
Came back for a while. I think they changed to Platinum Stars, and then didn't hear about them after that. Another club called Ria Stars, which was actually owned by one of the PSL exec committee members, also went under and never heard of them again.
Mm.
So that's I mean, that's yes, you get cases where clubs get bought off, or you get cases where clubs just fold, you know.
Sure.
They
Yeah.
don't have the money to sustain the club, or they haven't run the club well. So they're in a lot of financial turmoil.
Yeah. So I mean, is it quite common as well? Because obviously, from what happened with the Black Aces, it sounds like it was a case that they were defunct, but their franchise rights were almost still around because they were an academy team. Does that happen quite frequently, where a club will be defunct for a certain amount of years, and then someone will buy their rights and then rename them? So how do the franchise rights just do they stick around?
You see that's the different clubs would have different franchise right agreements.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's not a one size fits all, and that's where I say, I mean, if Wits could get bought off with their 100 years of existence, then every team can get bought off.
Yeah. Okay. So it's
So
every team, no team is safe, more or less.
100%. Unless the owners have got to be also clever to say, look, if you want to buy off the team, then you got to buy off the rights as well, or something like that, or you buy off the team but keep the name,
Yeah.
that type of thing. So that's the other way of getting around it here.
Okay. Interesting. So yeah, I mean, you've already listed quite a few clubs there. I mean, Manning Rangers, are they still around? Do you still go and support them, or are they long gone as well?
Long gone, unfortunately. I mean, I think they last were existence 2005, 2006,
Ah, okay.
and
Mm.
just folded after that. Yeah.
Okay. So do you go and see Cape Town City now, or you just get a neutral fan going to different games?
So because I'm in Johannesburg, it's tough to go
Of course.
to
Yeah.
Cape Town. It's like a 2 hour um, sort of flight. But I used to go to watch Fitz games. But because now they've been bought over and then they play the games in like Polokwane, it's hard to go. So I haven't actually been to a match in a long, long time, actually. No.
Mm. Yeah. Well, we need to change that. So we need to find a local team, maybe further down the divisions, junior
That's it.
football. Yeah, go where the real football is played, instead of all these companies and conglomerates and businessmen buying things up. You want to go and see the real football, as it were, no VAR decisions or anything like that, no nonsense, no paying a fortune to get through the gates. And I can imagine, just with the buyouts and everything else, there must be a really, really long list of clubs in South Africa that are now just, notes in history books.
Yeah, 100%. That's which is so sad, by the way, because they had such a good history.
Hmm. Absolutely, they would have had a fantastic history. I mean, you mentioned earlier as well, and we'll kind of come on to it now. Obviously, kind of moving into the present and away from
Yeah.
the kind of legacy of Black Aces and other lost clubs in South Africa. Well, first of all, tell us a little bit about yourself and your kind of history with football, because it sounds like, if you've played before and you've coached before, it sounds like you must have quite a few stories to tell about that from
So,
playing and coaching
so,
in South Africa.
so more of a football enthusiast. I think I played up until college level, And then, when you start working, you get a bit lazy and there's less time. But both my granddad and my dad played a lot of league football, like I said, back in the day.
Yeah.
And then, because you grew up supporting Manning Rangers, you built that sort of culture connection. And I think my granddad was an Everton fan, so also built that connection. So I love watching the game. I think it's also more watching from a more tactical perspective because, as an assistant coach at junior football, there's always little things you can take out from a game, you know, and give. So it's like developing that mindset. So yeah, I think just need to get back into watching more football live. Yeah.
Yeah. Nice, good. And you touched on it earlier as well. Obviously, in 2010, South Africa hosted the World Cup. Now, my only experience of football in South Africa up until that point was seeing Kaizer Chiefs and Orlando Pirates on FIFA. Okay,
Okay.
not something that was really broadcast or spoken about here in the West at all, or in Europe really. And there's different reasons for that as well. South Africa, up until the World Cup and probably even in the aftermath, a lot of people here probably wouldn't look at it and think of it as a big footballing nation, which obviously isn't the case because you've got loads of passionate people, loads of fantastic
Yes.
players, and loads of great teams as well. But obviously, as you said at the start of the episode, the South African football authorities are always looking for a quick fix. And it kind of sounds like that's what they thought with the World Cup, because it doesn't sound like they've put that infrastructure in place to then develop youth and try and take the national team to the next level.
Well, that's it. I mean, since 2010, I don't think we've qualified for a World Cup.
Hmm.
AFCON, we've missed quite a few AFCONs. So, okay, we'll be going to AFCON 2024 next year. But yeah, it's been also stop start, hire, fire coaches, you know. And that I think has been, one coach comes in, he wants to play youngsters, he loses a few games, he's under pressure.
Yeah.
Then he gets fired. New guy comes in, he tries to get quick results. Loses a few games under pressure, gets fired.
Yeah.
So, we never looked at a case where it doesn't seem to say, look, if we're getting a coach in, let's give him a 4-year plan or a 3-year stint.
Yeah.
That's the thing. Somehow, though, our ladies' football seem to be on the right track.
That's true.
They made the last World Cup, but I think because we don't have a full-on professional league, I mean, you can see the difference between when we played the likes of a Sweden and, a Holland and stuff like that. There wasn't a lot in it, but you can see those ladies have got the experience, calmness on the ball, the tactical fouling, knowing when to waste time, all of that.
Yeah, yeah. You know that there's something
So,
there, but it's just about getting it to the level that they want to be at as well as the fans.
yes, 100%. So I think that's where, we can, and to be fair to our ladies coach, she's been there for about 4 years,
Oh, okay.
Desiree Ellis. So
Mm.
at least there's been some continuity. I mean, she played for the ladies national team and then retired, and then they brought her in to coach. So she's done a good job thus far.
Yeah. Yeah. It's all about
Yeah.
building something for the future. And like you said with the men's team as well, you can't build something if you're constantly hiring and firing coaches. You can't build something if there's no longevity or consistency. There needs to be a good infrastructure there to be able to push that up. I mean, kind of going on to the PSL and the domestic league, do you think that, well, I'm not sure if I've seen this recently. Maybe is it maybe either Kaizer Chiefs or Orlando Pirates are in a bit of trouble this season? They've fallen quite far down the division.
Yeah.
I mean, is there anyone who's going to be able to challenge Sundowns anytime soon, or is the gap just too large at this point in time to even think about it?
Well, I mean, they're already like 5 points ahead with still 5 games to play, I think, in terms of 5 games in hand for them. So, sure, they can win 6 games in a row. Other teams can't do that.
Yeah,
That's the simple fact. Yeah.
yeah, that's the difference. So, obviously, by the sounds of things, it doesn't sound like this the kind of trend of teams being bought out and changed is going to end anytime soon. I mean, you never know. Maybe in 10 years' time, Cape Town City
Yes.
challenging Sundowns for the title and doing other things. But unfortunately, until that comes, we'll never know, and you can only hope that football in South Africa gets bigger on the international stage, because it sounds like sounds like a fantastic spectacle to watch, and if
Yes, it
people
is.
had access to it, then they'd be able to see it, and that would obviously bring more attention to the players. Because I had a quick look at South African players across Europe, and there's a number in Scotland, but they're mainly in the lower tiers, Highland
Yes.
League. Obviously, you mentioned the Burnley player, his name that's
Foster.
yes, that's right. And there's a number in England's conference leagues as well, and then they're kind of spread out, some in Georgia, Armenia, etc., etc. But you'd hope eventually that those players would get to a bigger platform, and give football in South Africa the exposure that it deserves.
100%. And that's what we need to take Bafana to the next level where we can compete on the international stage,
Yeah. Yeah, that's what everyone wants. I mean, it's been a really fantastic and fascinating episode so far, Nim, and we've covered quite a lot. I mean, from the history of the Black Aces and Manning Rangers, as you've mentioned, and the other teams and things currently. You can tell you're really passionate about the sport in your country, which is what we love to see.
We got to be, to get them, to try and get them back to, the top of the pile at least, or at least in Africa,
Yeah, absolutely. Back at the top of the pile is where you want to be. Listen, thank you very much for coming on again, Nim. This has been an absolutely fantastic episode, and I really hope.
You're welcome. Thanks for the opportunity. Yeah.
No problem at all. And of course, if there is a club or a topic that you want us to cover that's related to football history or heritage, whether it's a lost club, a former ground, a good story, a player's career, just anything you can think of related to football history, heritage, identity, culture, or even community, then please let us know. You can get in touch with us on X @_footyheritage, or email us at hello@footballheritage.co.uk. We'll get back in touch with you. We'll see if we can arrange a chat to get you in the podcast, and we'll go through that with you. So there's anything that you can think of, just let us know. Or even if you just want to have a chat, or you have a question about this episode, get in touch. We're always up for speaking to people, particularly when football and history is concerned. But for now, Nim, say goodbye to our listeners.
Thanks a lot. Yeah. All the best, and have a great evening. Thanks a lot.
Thanks very much, you too. And it's a good night from me as well. Goodbye, everyone.
Cool. Cheers.